The alarms were already screaming when Yale reached the bridge. She had been awake for 4 minutes. That was all. 4 minutes since the long-range sensors tripped the alert, since the deep vibration ran through the deck plates of the Rachel like a heartbeat too long suppressed, since the ship pulled itself out of 300 years of calculated silence into something raw and awake, and entirely visible to a galaxy that had spent 3 centuries pretending it did not exist. She dropped into the command seat. Petra was already at tactical. Don was at navigation, running checks without being asked, his hands moving through the confirmation sequence with the particular efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment since childhood. Owen had somehow gotten to the engineering relay station before anyone else, which was either impressive or alarming, and Yale had decided months ago not to investigate which. "Show me the long range," she said. The display came up, 47 vessels, Empire-class formation, widespread, all moving along the same heading, toward the Rachel. "Time to weapons range." 17 minutes, Petra said. She said it the way she said everything, flat, precise, no emotional loading attached. "Start the broadcast." The archive had lived in the Rachel's systems for 300 years, 47 terabytes, every record, every order, every court document bearing the seal of the Galactic Empire and leading, one verified step at a time, to the last days of Earth. The names of colony ships denied safe passage during the Purge. The coordinates of mass graves on 4 moons that Imperial history listed as uninhabited. Medical reports on populations classified as voluntarily transitioned. The testimony of 2,000 survivors who had boarded this ship, while the Empire's fleet held position at Earth's orbital boundary and watched. All of it going out now on every frequency, encrypted in 17 languages, addressed to every independent receiver in the known galaxy. It had been ready for longer than any of them had been alive. Don confirmed it without looking up. Archive live, maximum signal strength confirmed. Yale pulled up the crew manifest on the secondary screen, 847 names. She had memorized all of them. She had memorized their parents' names too, and their grandparents', going back 10 generations to the original 2000. She had found her own name in the manifest once, not hers but her ancestors', same name and rank and designation, carried forward generation by generation like something between a title and a debt. Commander Yale Voss. The pens on the edge of the navigation console were rolling toward the drop. She caught them without looking, lined them up. 2 started rolling again. "We have a response," Owen said from communications. "Not Empire, small vessel, Thari registration." He squinted at his screen. "Translation matrix is working on it. 1 word. Closest equivalent in standard is survivors." The bridge went still. Yale had read about the Thari in the archive. They appeared in the records 17 times, twice as potential allies in the years before the Purge, diplomatic contacts that the Empire had closed without explanation. 15 times after that in Imperial communications, listed as a species successfully integrated and pacified. She had always understood exactly what that phrase meant. "Tell them yes," she said. Owen opened a response channel. On the display, the Thari vessel was small and running a modified drive signature, positioned well off the Rachel's port side. It looked like a ship that had spent a long time making itself difficult to notice, that had learned surviving meant becoming invisible to the things that wanted you gone. She recognized that architecture completely. The Empire's formation had tightened to 43 vessels. 5 had broken off toward the outer broadcast relays. Too late. The signal had already reached the Veth Confederacy, the Solon Remnant, and 43 independent stations along the Pale Arm. The communications queue was filling with incoming responses, stacking faster than the Matrix could sort them. "They are asking if we are hostile," Petra said. "Who?" "The Empire." Yale looked at the console. She thought about the 2,000 people who had boarded this ship with nothing except the documentation they had spent their last free years collecting. She thought about what it meant to be asked whether you meant harm by the entity that had defined you as a refugee. She sent back the Empire's own hailing frequency, on a loop, at maximum volume. Don looked at her from across the bridge. She was already counting the pens. 6 of them. She lined them up by length, smallest to largest, precisely spaced along the edge of the console. 12 minutes to weapons range, Petra said. Outside the viewport, the stars sat exactly where they had always sat. Patient, unbothered. The galaxy had not yet decided to care about one small ship broadcasting into the dark, but it was starting to listen. She could feel it in the volume of incoming signals, in the way the communications queue kept expanding, in the way the Thari vessel held its position and waited. The Empire was going to make a decision in the next 12 minutes that would make considerably more of the galaxy pay very close attention, very fast. Yale did not need to do anything else right now. Raka, Owen said suddenly. She looked up. What? The Thari captain. Matrix finally got a name. Raka, he paused. It means approximately the one who remembers. Yale looked at the manifest on the secondary screen. 847 names, each one carried forward because someone had refused to let them disappear. The one who remembers. She thought that was probably the only kind of person worth being, in the end. 7 minutes, Petra said. Yale put the pens in a row and kept her hands very still. Let them come, she said. The first Empire transmission came through in formal Imperial Standard. The Rachel's Matrix had it translated in 4 seconds. Vessel of unknown origin. You are broadcasting restricted historical content under Imperial Preservation Order 7. This constitutes deliberate destabilization. Stand down your broadcast immediately or be classified as a hostile combatant. She read it twice. Historical falsification. That was what the early intercepts had called it. Empire communications burning back and forth across the galactic core in barely encrypted panic. The bureaucratic machinery of an 800-year institution suddenly running very fast in a very small space. 47 terabytes of verified court records, medical documentation, and survivor testimony, classified as fiction because the alternative was admitting it was fact. She laughed, briefly, in the specific way a person laughs when something is both genuinely absurd and also the worst thing they have ever read. Then she turned to Don. Double the broadcast power. He did it without pausing. This was the quality she valued most in him, not the skills, though those were excellent, but the complete absence of hesitation between decision and action. Other people paused to evaluate. Don just moved to the next thing. The archive went out at twice the strength. The Empire's formation had grown to 63 vessels. Yale watched them on the tactical display and noted, with professional interest, that they had stopped moving. They had been on a steady intercept heading for the past hour, and now they were holding at extreme weapons range. And holding meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant she had already rattled them more than they wanted to admit. Good. The communications queue was not slowing down. Signals from the Veth Confederacy, the Solon Remnant, the Pale Arm stations, and then 2 signals on frequencies so old the Rachel systems had to dig through tertiary records just to decode them. Species the Empire had listed as extinct. Taking notes from the Thari, apparently. Learning that becoming invisible was not the same as being gone. Raka had kept her vessel within visual range this entire time. Up close, through the display's enhanced imaging, the Thari ship was a collection of repairs. The hull was patched in at least 11 distinct places with materials that did not match each other. Decades of damage and recovery written directly into the structure, visible and deliberate, and not hidden at all. The Rachel had the same quality. Different materials, same story. When Raka spoke, the translation matrix processed the colors first and the words second. This was unusual enough that Yale made a note of it for the archive. The words came through as, "How many of you are there?" 847, Yale said. The color that came back was not in the matrix's standard library. The system flagged it and offered its closest approximation. No direct equivalent. Context suggests the emotional state of outliving something that deserved to outlive you. Yale kept her expression even. "How many of you?" she asked. Raka said fewer. That was the entire answer. Don looked at Yale across the bridge. Yale looked at the pens. She moved the second one slightly to the left. Owen's head came up from the communications bay. Second Empire transmission. This one was shorter. A single sentence. A human voice, clipped, Imperial core accent. The kind of accent that had spent 800 years being enforced across absorbed civilizations as the default sound of authority. "This is your final warning." Yale opened the live broadcast channel, not just to the Empire but to every receiver currently showing up in the queue. She had been building to this. She had spent 34 years building to this, one generation in an unbroken chain of people who had been building to this since they left. "This is Commander Yale Voss of the Generation ship Rachel," she said. "We are the descendants of Earth's population displaced by Imperial Order 300 years ago. We are not a military vessel. We are a record. Every document we have broadcast is sourced from Imperial archives that have been suppressed for 3 centuries. We are not here to fight. We are here to be heard." She let the channel sit open for 2 seconds. "We have been patient." She closed the channel. "Formation is moving again," Petra said from tactical. "Toward us." "Yes," a pause. "And the Thari vessel has changed position. It is now between us and the lead ships." Yale looked up. Raka had placed her small, 11 times repaired vessel in the path of 63 Imperial warships, without negotiation, without a request, without anything except a decision made and acted on while Yale had been talking. She thought about what to say. She took 3 seconds. "Tell Raka we see her," she said. The color response came back in less than a second. The matrix translated it as, "Understood." Felix was at the secondary sensor station. He was 19, shipborne like all of them, and this was the first time in his life he had ever seen anything outside the hull except through a viewport or a display. His voice was not afraid when he said, very quietly, "They are actually going to fire." "Yes," Yale said. "Even though the entire galaxy is listening." "Especially because," she said. She understood the Empire's logic. It was the same logic that had worked for 800 years. If you moved decisively enough and with enough force, the watching did not matter. The watching never mattered when the outcome was complete enough. They did not yet understand what they were looking at. The lead vessel armed its primary weapons. Every alert on the tactical display shifted to red. The bridge was lit almost entirely in that color for a moment. Yale opened the live broadcast channel again. She did not say anything into it. She just left it open, every receiver in range listening. Let them hear what came next. 30 seconds, Petra said. She picked up the first pen. "Put it down." "Incoming fire," Petra said. For 47 seconds, the Rachel did not respond. This was the part the Empire had not prepared for. They had prepared for return fire, for defensive maneuvers, for emergency jump, for the full range of standard tactical responses a vessel under attack would choose. They had run those calculations before they fired. The Rachel did none of them. The Rachel sat in the middle of 63 armed warships and went silent for 47 seconds. The Empire's commanders would be questioning their calculations right now. She knew this with absolute certainty because she had spent her entire life reading the archive, and the archive was full of Imperial tactical doctrine. An Imperial tactical doctrine had one deep and consistent weakness. It could not process a response it had not anticipated. They were looking at the Rachel right now and seeing something their sensors could not classify. The hull composition read wrong. The shield signature matched no known configuration. The weapons profile, because the Rachel had weapons, they simply had not deployed them yet, did not appear in any Imperial database. Because they were not Imperial weapons. They had been built from nothing by 8 generations of ship-borne engineers who had no resources except what was already on board and no motivation except survival. The Empire's weapons were designed to destroy Empire-class shielding. The Rachel did not have Empire-class shielding. It had something older, something stranger, something that had been repaired and rebuilt and modified so many times by so many different hands over so many decades that it had stopped being any one thing and had become something entirely its own. The Empire was looking at the Rachel and seeing a ghost. Ghosts made Imperial commanders nervous. Good. At 47 seconds, Yale said, "Petra." Ready. One shot, the lead vessel's communications array, nothing else. Petra held eye contact with her for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at her panel. Confirmed. The Rachel fired. The shot was precise to 4 decimal points. It removed the lead vessel's communications array, not the ship, not the weapons systems, not the crew. The single component that allowed the lead commander to coordinate with the rest of the formation. Gone. The live broadcast channel caught all of it. Every receiver in the galaxy that had been listening to the archive was now listening to this. They could hear the 47 seconds of silence after the Rachel took a hit. They could hear the single returning shot. They could draw whatever conclusions they liked about a vessel that had lost 3 crew members, gone quiet for less than a minute, and responded by removing one specific piece of equipment with absolute precision. Yale opened the broadcast channel. "We could have destroyed it," she said. "Note the difference." She closed the channel. For 8 seconds, nothing moved. 63 Imperial vessels holding formation, no longer completely certain of the situation they were in. Then Rocca fired. Not at the Rachel, not at a communications relay. Rocca opened fire on the Empire formation's eastern flank with weapons that had not appeared on the Rachel's sensors until the exact moment they were used. Small weapons, precise, hitting specific systems on specific vessels with a knowledge of Imperial ship architecture that only came from long and careful preparation. "She has been ready for this longer than we have," Don said quietly from navigation. Yale thought that was probably true. The Veth Confederacy opened fire on the western flank. 6 Confederacy vessels, fast and coordinated, driving into the formation's rear support line. Yale watched the tactical display automatically expand to accommodate the new contacts. Then the independent stations along the pale arm began broadcasting on the Rachel's frequency. Not weapons fire, records, their own archives, their own documentation, collected across their own generations, preserved and protected and held in readiness for exactly this kind of moment. "Incoming signals on the broadcast frequency," Owen said. He sounded like he was struggling to keep pace with the numbers. 14 distinct new sources, now 16, 22. He stopped counting. The display kept expanding. Yale watched the Empire's formation begin to break. Not in defeat, not yet, but in the way a rigid structure breaks when struck from too many directions at once. Individual commanders losing the unified tactical picture, responding to separate threats, coordination dissolving into reaction. The communications array she had removed helped with that considerably. Felix said, "This is not a battle." "No," Yale said. "It is something else entirely." Yes. What it was, she thought, was a demonstration. The archive had already done the real work before the first shot was ever fired. It had reached 24 civilizations before any weapon was deployed, and every civilization that received it had its own decades or centuries of suppressed anger to bring to the equation. The Rachel had not started a war. The Rachel had simply been the visible thing that made the war finally possible. The match, not the fire. The fire had been building for a very long time. Nora pulled up the broader tactical picture on the main forward screen. Yale looked at it. It was large, much larger than she had expected, even though she had spent months calculating what the archive's release would trigger. Seeing it on the screen was different from holding the calculation in her head. It was the difference between a model and the real thing. And the real thing had a scale, and a weight that no model could fully contain. "Rachel Systems?" she asked. Owen ran the diagnostic. Section 7 sealed, drives 1 and 2 fully operational, drive 3 at 81%, hull integrity 93% overall. He paused. "We took the hit well." 300 years of necessity had built that resilience. 8 generations of engineers constructing a ship not for warfare but for endurance, for outlasting anything the galaxy put in front of it. The Rachel was not strong in the way the Empire's vessels were strong. It was strong in the way something is strong when it has survived everything it was never supposed to survive. Raka's voice came through the channel, colors first, words second. The words were, "Still here." "Still here," Yale said. She looked at the secondary screen, 844 names. Outside the viewport, the stars were the same as they had always been, patient and unbothered and full of light that had been traveling for longer than any of this would last. The Rachel held its position in the middle of the largest galactic conflict in 800 years, and Yale kept the broadcast channel open and did not say another word into it. The galaxy had everything it needed now. She had been patient for 300 years. She could wait a little longer. The assassination attempt started on the 3rd day. Yale was in the drive section reviewing Owen's patchwork on the Section 7 damage when the security alert came through. Someone had accessed the archive's master broadcast verification node with deletion credentials. Not a remote intrusion, a physical one, someone on the ship. She walked to the node room without running. Running communicated information she did not always want communicated, and the corridors of the Rachel were narrow enough that people noticed everything. The crew member standing at the panel was young, maybe 20, holding position with the deletion command half-entered. The expression on their face was not guilt. It was something harder to read, something that looked like belief in a thing that had been explained to them very convincingly by someone else. "Step away from the panel," Yale said. They stepped away. The panel showed a partial command string aimed at the broadcast verification records, the documentation that authenticated every piece of the archive as genuine. Without those records, the Empire could classify the entire archive as fabricated. Everything 300 years of preservation had built, undone in 2 hours by a single deletion. "Who asked you to do this?" Yale said. They gave her a name she did not recognize. "Is that a person on this ship?" "No, a signal 3 days ago before the broadcast. They stopped. They said the broadcast would start a war." "It did," Yale said. "They said people would die." "Some have," she said. The crew member looked at her for a moment. Then they looked at the floor and did not say anything else. She had them taken to quarters and placed under restriction. She stood at the panel and looked at the half-entered deletion command for a moment. Then she closed it, filed a full security audit request, and went back to reviewing Owen's patchwork. The second attempt came on the 5th day and was considerably more sophisticated. A communications packet addressed to the Rachel's Life Support Management System, routed through the Veth Confederacy relay, technically very clean, the kind of intrusion that required serious resources and careful planning to build. It would have rerouted atmosphere recycling in the crew quarters over 6 days, slowly enough that the sensors would not flag it until the process was already past the point of correction. Nora found it in 30 seconds during her daily systems analysis. She flagged it and had it contained before it progressed past the first routing step. Yale looked at the trail and traced it back to its origin. Not Imperial, Confederacy adjacent. A faction operating without the formal Confederacy government's knowledge that wanted the archive's master copy and wanted the Rachel gone before it complicated the post-war negotiations they were already trying to arrange on their own terms. They did not want the empire destroyed. They wanted the war ended on terms they had already written, and the Rachel was a variable that did not fit into any of their projections. She sent the full evidence to the Confederacy's Oversight Council without commentary. She did not need to add any. The intelligence director responsible was removed within a week. The Oversight Council sent a formal apology and an offer of enhanced cooperation. Yale filed both in the archive under a category she labeled, with no particular ambiguity, ongoing. Don found her in the corridor outside the communications bay on the 40th day. He stood with his arms folded, which was the posture he adopted when he was about to say something he had already made peace with saying, even though he expected her not to want to hear it. "This is going to keep happening," he said. "Probably. Every side is going to want to either use us or remove us. As long as we are out here, independent, we do not fit the picture anyone is building for what comes after all of this." "Good," she said. Don looked at her. "The Thari offered us a berth at their primary station," she said. "The Confederacy has sent 2 alliance requests. 3 independent stations have offered resupply and political shelter. Yesterday, I received a message from an entity broadcasting on an unregistered frequency offering us a planetary surface to land on." She kept her voice even. "Everyone wants to attach us to something, make us part of their story so they can decide what the story means." "Is that bad?" "Yes, because the moment we are attached to someone else's story, we stop being the record. We become evidence in somebody's argument." She looked at the corridor wall. "That is not what we came back for." Don was quiet for a moment. Then, "People are dying in this war." "Yes. People are dying because of what we did." She looked at him directly. "People died because of what the archive documents. That was 300 years of dying. We have been keeping the count." She paused. "Ask me if I would do it again." He did not ask. He already knew she would. The war was not following the shape of any historical conflict she had studied. The empire was not fighting a unified opposition. It was fracturing from the inside, cracking along lines the archive had exposed, its absorbed civilizations beginning to ask questions that had no acceptable imperial answers. 3 member states had publicly requested independent tribunal review. 2 border regions had suspended imperial tax compliance. The military was still coherent and capable, but it was now fighting on 17 fronts simultaneously, while the political apparatus that funded it buckled under the weight of a history it could no longer suppress. Meanwhile, every civilization that had received the archive was doing something with it. The Solon remnant had cross-referenced it with their own suppressed records and found documentation extending the timeline of imperial crimes back another full century before the Purge. The Pale Arm stations had converted it into a continuous public broadcast network, transmitting on open frequencies across their entire sector. A Veth academic institution had published a formal historical analysis in 16 languages, drawing on both the archive and their own materials, that became the most widely distributed document in recorded galactic history within 48 hours of its release. The most dangerous thing the Rachel had carried back was not a weapon. It was 47 terabytes of the truth, and the truth was currently doing what the truth always did when released into a system that had spent centuries containing it. On the 47th day, A Thari diplomatic vessel docked at the Rachel's secondary airlock. A different vessel from Raqa's, larger, formal, clearly official. The envoy who came aboard was young and well-dressed by Thari standards, and visibly carrying a question she could not predict the answer to. Yale met her in the docking corridor. The envoy went through the formal acknowledgement, colors careful and precise, the translation matrix rendering it in neat standard. On behalf of several parties now involved in the proceedings, she wished to ask whether humanity intended to return. Yale said nothing. There are 14 vessels currently in transit toward Earth's coordinates, the envoy said. Scientific survey vessels primarily. Initial reports indicate the planet is recoverable. The damage done 300 years ago was not permanent. With appropriate effort and resources, the surface could be habitable again. The words sat in the docking corridor between them. Yale was counting the rivets on the floor. She had started without noticing. At 112 she caught herself. She kept going anyway. 200, 240, 312. 340. Put the survey findings in the archive, she said. The envoy waited. All of them, everything the survey vessels find. Let whoever needs to know about Earth read about it there. She kept her voice level and informative. The archive is the right place for that. And humanity's response, whether you intend to return. Yale finally looked up from the floor. Earth is not coordinates anymore, she said. You cannot return to something that is already the back of the ship. The envoy's colors shifted into something the matrix could not translate at all. Yale thanked her for the formal acknowledgement and the offer and walked back toward the bridge. Behind her she heard Don breathe in, then out. He did not say anything. She did not count her steps. She stopped in the corridor just outside the bridge and stood with her back against the wall for 30 seconds. Then she went in and took her seat and looked at the tactical display. On the 61st day, the Empire opened a formal negotiation channel. Not a demand, not an ultimatum. A negotiation channel, properly flagged under Galactic diplomatic protocol, addressed to the Rachel directly, requesting a response at the earliest opportunity. She read the message 3 times. She looked for the trap in it carefully, because the Empire had always put a trap in everything, and she had been trained to find it. There was no trap. They were just tired. 17 fronts, a political apparatus in free collapse, member states defecting, a history it could no longer rewrite because the rewrite had been publicly distributed in 17 languages to every corner of the known galaxy. Yale pulled up a clean response document. She typed, "We are listening." She sent it. She sat at the console for a moment afterward. She looked at the pens. She lined them up, all 6, smallest to largest. She kept them very still. She looked at the manifest, 844 names. She kept it open. The tribunal took 11 months to convene. Yale spent most of those 11 months on the bridge, which was where she had spent most of her life, but the work was different now. Before the broadcast, the work had been the archive, maintaining it, protecting it, keeping it in a constant state of readiness. Now the work was testimony. 16 civilizations were contributing documentation to the proceedings, all of it being cross-referenced against the Rachel's archive, and cross-referencing at judicial-grade accuracy required human review because translation matrices were reliable but not reliable enough for evidence that would carry a verdict. She reviewed 12 hours of documentation every day. She also received, on average, 4 formal communications per day requesting her presence somewhere, her endorsement of something, her signature on a document. She replied to all of them, declined most of them, replied to all of them because declining was not the same as ignoring and the distinction mattered. The 3rd assassination attempt came in the 2nd month, delivered through a spoofed diplomatic signal and aimed at the drive section. Nora caught it. Nora had developed a specific talent for identifying things that were pretending to be other things, which Yale believed was both a result of her training and an expression of her character. The fourth attempt was more coordinated, 3 systems simultaneously, clearly built by someone with detailed knowledge of the Rachel's architecture. It was neutralized in 14 minutes. The origin traced back to a Confederacy intelligence operation running without its own government's knowledge. She sent the evidence to the Oversight Council without commentary. The intelligence director was removed. A formal apology arrived. She filed it. Don told her in the 3rd month that he was considering taking the Thari Collective's offer. Not the ship, just himself. An advisory position with the Reconstruction Council, working on historical reconciliation, building documentation structures, helping shape how the next 2 centuries of galactic history would be recorded. He said it carefully, standing in the same corridor, with the full and obvious awareness that it would land in a complicated place. It did not land badly. It landed like something she had already known was coming, and had simply not finished preparing a response to yet. She asked him what the offer involved. He told her in detail. She listened to all of it. Then she said, "You should go." He looked like he had expected a different response. "The reconstruction needs people who understand what records are for," she said. "You have been reading the archive since you were 4 years old. You know what it costs to keep something like that alive across generations. That is exactly the kind of knowledge the reconstruction needs." She looked at the corridor wall. "Go do it." "What about you?" "I have a ship," she said. He did not push it after that. He understood when a thing was settled. The tribunal chamber was the largest enclosed space Yale had ever been in. She stood in it on the first morning of her testimony and spent 3 minutes doing what she always did in new spaces. She found the structural elements. She learned the geometry. She located the exits, 14 of them. The chamber held 4,000 delegates representing 29 civilizations. The artificial light was calibrated for a species with different visual ranges than hers, and sound moved strangely in a space that large. She found all 14 exits. Then she sat down and began to speak. Her testimony ran 18 hours, delivered across 3 days. She spoke in standard, evenly, without notes. The archive had been the foundation of everything she had ever known, and she had never needed notes to speak from it. The delegates were mostly quiet. Some asked questions, which she answered with the same precision she used for damage reports. Most of the questions were good, specific, aimed at verification, looking for inconsistencies that were not there because the documentation was genuine and had been maintained to the standard of something people had given their lives to protect. A few questions aimed at interpretation, at causation, at the question of whether the archive established what the prosecution claimed. To those she said only, "Read the documents." On the 3rd day, the lead tribunal counsel asked what Yale considered the central finding of the Rachel's archive. She thought about it for a genuine moment. That it happened, she said, completely, systematically, with full documentation at every level. That the people responsible knew exactly what they were doing, recorded what they were doing, and expected they would never be required to account for it. And that expectation proved incorrect, the counsel said. Yes, because of the Rachel. She considered this carefully. Because of the people who built the Rachel, she said. 300 years ago, 2,000 people decided that the most important thing they could do was carry a record. Not a weapon, not a political force. A record and the means to deliver it. I am the means. The record is the point. The counsel noted this and moved to the next question. The verdicts came on a Tuesday. 17 categories. War crimes, crimes against independent populations, historical falsification at the governmental level, systematic cultural erasure across multiple civilizations, and the deliberate suppression of survival documentation spanning 3 centuries. The Empire's successor states, 4 of them now after the formal fragmentation during the proceedings, were held accountable across all 17 categories in varying degrees, according to their level of cooperation with the tribunal. The 2 cooperative successors received structured rehabilitation frameworks under ongoing tribunal oversight. The 2 non-cooperative ones were placed under joint galactic administration until accountability proceedings could be completed. Yale watched the verdicts come through on the secondary screen from the bridge, where she had watched most of the proceedings when she was not physically present. Owen was at his station. Felix was at sensors. Nora was at systems. Eli was running calculations no one had requested, but that everyone understood he ran when he needed his hands to be doing something. The verdicts landed, one at a time. She had expected to feel something large. She had been carrying the weight of these verdicts her entire life, carrying them in anticipation. The way you carry something that has not yet happened, but that you know with absolute certainty is coming, and have prepared for in every detail. What she felt was complete. Not happy, not the relief she had seen depicted in historical records after major events, not the particular rush she had felt when the broadcast went live, when the Empire went silent for 47 seconds, when Raka moved her ship into the formation's path without being asked. Complete, like a diagnostic that has run through every system and returned all clear. She updated the manifest. 844 names, each one with a full record attached, and at the top of the manifest a header she had written herself on the day the Rachel came out of drift. Mission status, active. She changed it now. Mission status, Phase 1 complete. She saved it, left it open. The offer came 3 days after the verdicts, a formal multilateral communication signed by 9 separate governing bodies, a planet, a designated colonial zone with significant resources and a prepared infrastructure framework. It was not Earth. Earth was under survey, and the survey data was flowing into the archive, and that was where Earth belonged right now. This was a new world, an offered world, something that had been prepared and was being handed forward as a formal acknowledgement of what 300 years of displacement had cost. Yale called a shipwide meeting. The main corridor could hold 400 people comfortably and 844 uncomfortably, and they made it work. She stood at the forward end, near the drive section access, and she told them everything. The planet, the infrastructure, the diplomatic framework, the commitments the 9 governing bodies had made. She told them about Don's offer because it was relevant context, because there was meaningful work to be done not just in the colony, but in the reconstruction process, in the documentation work, in the ongoing historical record the galaxy was going to need people to build and maintain. She talked for 40 minutes, then she stopped and let people ask questions. The questions took 3 hours. They were not naive questions. These were people who had grown up reading the archive, who understood that history was not background decoration, but an active present condition, who had spent their entire lives knowing what it cost to carry something important across time and deliver it intact. They asked about governance structure, about historical continuity, about what it meant to define home when home had always been a moving thing that you were born into and had never chosen. She answered what she could, said clearly when she did not know. At the end she said, "You have 3 days to decide." She did not tell them what she was going to do. She noticed that no one asked. She thought about what that meant for a while and put it somewhere she did not look at directly. On the second day, Don came to the bridge and sat at his station and worked his shift the way he always did, and after a while he said without looking up, 735 people are going. She had not known the number yet. Good, she said. Raka's people are going to help with the initial settlement infrastructure. She has been coordinating with the Colonial Framework Committee for 2 weeks. He paused. I did not know if you knew. I did not, Yale said. I am not surprised. No, he said, me neither. They sat in the quiet of the bridge for a while. The drive hum was steady. The sound the Rachel made when it was running maintenance cycles, low and even and completely familiar, the sound she had heard every single day of her life. I will be at the colony, Dawn said finally, if you come through this sector. I know, she said. Take care of the ship. She looked at the viewport. The ship takes care of me. He almost smiled. He stood up and left the bridge, and she heard his footsteps moving down the corridor, and then she did not hear them anymore. On the third day, 109 people did not go to the planet. They assembled in the docking bay at 6 in the morning, ship standard, because 6 in the morning was when the system's checks ran, and if you were beginning a new phase of something you might as well begin it with clean diagnostics. Yale stood at the forward end of the bay and looked at them. 109 people, mostly ship-borne, a few who had thought carefully about the colony offer and found that a planet was not the shape their life was built for. She did not think less of the 735 who had chosen to go. She had told them there was no wrong answer, and she had meant it entirely. The right decision for 735 people was the right decision, and the manifest would carry that forward exactly as it should. These 109 people looked at her the way her crew had always looked at her, not for permission, not for reassurance, for the next thing, because the next thing was the only mode any of them had ever had, born into motion, built for it. She straightened her jacket. Full diagnostic before we move, she said. Drive status, hull integrity, and a complete archive verification. The archive verification is not optional. Already running, Nora said. Good. She looked at the manifest, 109 names. She updated the header. Generation 11, she said. Mission ongoing. No one said anything. They did not need to. They moved to their stations, Petra to tactical, Owen to engineering, Felix to sensors, Nora to systems, Eli to the secondary consoles, and the bridge came alive with the specific and ordinary sound of a crew doing what it had been built to do. Yale sat in the command seat. The Rachel's main drive cycled up. She felt it through the seat frame, through the deck plates, through the soles of her boots. The deep familiar shudder that had been the foundation of her entire life, the sound the ship made when it was about to move, the sound that meant everything was as it should be. On the display, the colony coordinates were falling behind. 735 people below on a world that was new and offered, and full of the particular difficult promise that comes with beginning something in a place that was not built to hold you, but has decided to try. She watched the planet until it was no longer on the display. She did not feel the large thing she had expected to feel about it. Whatever that thing was supposed to be, it did not arrive. She sat with the absence of it for a moment and found that she did not mind. She felt the drive, the shudder, the stars going long and thin as the Rachel accelerated. She pulled up the manifest and saved it. Then she pulled up the archive. Not to review it, not to cross-reference or verify or update. She pulled it up because it was what she had always done when the ship was moving, and she needed to know where she was. The archive was the fixed point. The archive was the reason for all of it, the reason the ship existed, the reason she existed, the chain of purpose running from the original 2000 back through every generation to this one, this specific moment. This particular configuration of 109 people going forward into the dark. 47 terabytes of original documentation, plus 7 months of tribunal records, plus the survey data from Earth, growing as the vessels in transit continued their work, plus the records of 29 civilizations contributing to the reconstruction proceedings, plus the ongoing documentation that Dawn would be building from the Reconstruction Council, feeding into the archive's live section, adding to it the same way it had always been added to, one verified record at a time. It was not finished. It was never going to be finished. That was not a failure. That was the entire structure of what it was. Yale looked at the viewport. The stars were the same as they had always been, patient and steady, and full of distances she would spend the rest of her life moving across. The galaxy stretched out in every direction without end, full of civilizations still coming to terms